Well, we did it once again. We joined the 24-hour game jam and eagerly committed to an overscoped project just because the concept sounded exciting, only to end up pivoting halfway through and cutting the scope down to a sliver of what it once was. Stay tuned to see how we saved the situation and still managed to submit a game on time. We took part in Kenney Jam 2026, celebrating its 10th anniversary along with 3,000 other participants. It spanned from the 17th until the 19th of July 2026, and the theme this year was Scale. Since this jam is co-hosted by Kenney and KKit, two popular outlets for low-fidelity, game-ready assets, there's an additional constraint. We're only allowed to use their visual assets to create the game. Visual assets meaning sprites, 3D models, textures, UI elements, etc. We can use them as is or apply some moderate edits to them. We had free reign over the audio and fonts as they had a very small offering when it came to these kinds of assets, and being able to create our own branding for the game, such as a custom logo and thumbnail. On top of all of this, there were a few additional goals to pursue that were meant for more seasoned jammers looking for an additional challenge. I'll go through these in the submission portion of the video. We like to do things that are weird and different. Jam themes can usually be interpreted in many ways. Scale can, for example, merely refer to size, things getting bigger or smaller. This is, in my opinion, the most straightforward way to interpret a theme, therefore probably the one most people would go for, and thus the one we should avoid if we wish to stand out. The less obvious ways one could interpret the theme is climbing, aka scaling a building, but I had no standout ideas in this regard. A literal weighing scale. My first idea was actually some kind of Mario Party style minigame that had you running around and balancing objects that fell out of the sky. It could refer to the scales of a reptile or fish, and that's when we got excited. You see, for years we've been keeping an ever-growing list of ideas that we'd like to work on, and up there, near the top, is Fishing Championship. This felt like a great opportunity to finally scratch it off the list. But as we had high expectations for the fishing game, we immediately committed our first mistake. Overscoping. We wanted to cram every idea we've cooked up for Fishing Championship over the years. It would have been a multi-stage game loop including an explorable overworld, a fishing stage where you actually catch the fish, a descaling minigame where you'd enhance the value of the fish. This is one of 3 ways the theme would have kicked in. A selling phase where we just plop fish and money onto a weighing scale. This would have been the second of 3. And finally, an upgrade phase where you'd buy items that increase various properties, making you better at the game. Since you'd be scaling up your fishing operation, this would have been the third and final, but admittedly vaguest way of matching the theme. Had this been a typical 7 to 9 day jam, then sure, we could probably pull it off, but for a 2-day jam, no way. Overscoping notwithstanding, I fired up Godot and started dragging in asset after asset in a foolhardy manner, including every single model I thought would make for a nice addition. Within the first several hours of the first day, instead of focusing on the core gameplay loop, like I should have, I put together this cozy looking main menu screen and the initial portion of the overworld. Luckily, I could just copy and paste the code from the previous time I used navigation agents in a Godot project, which was coincidentally last year's Kenney Jam. It worked well, for the most part. With the lake and pier in place, I started to think about the actual fishing mechanic.
In the meantime, I wanted to make a quick prototype of the descaling minigame. I'm personally not experienced with Godot, so I used GDevelop to put it together since it allows me to work quickly. Here's a quick rundown on how it works. As mentioned before, we plan to have 4 scenes: fishing, descaling, a shop, and an upgrade section. Since this prototype is focused only on the descaling part, the other scenes just consist of placeholder text. On each day, the fishing scene would just show how much fish you caught. In the descaling portion, you start working on the fish you caught using these tools from the generic asset pack from Kenney. You start off with a knife, you simply click and drag through the blue fish scale to descale them. You do the same with the green and orange fish, but it takes a few more strokes with your basic tool. To add some sort of progression, you would have been able to upgrade your knife and descale these fish with a single stroke too. Once you descale all the fish you caught or you're out of time, you go to the shop scene. Again, since this prototype is only focused on the descaling minigame, it shows how much you earn from all the raw fish and descaled fish. I was excited to put this into the game. I was convinced it will be the most unique fit for the scale theme. But as it turns out, if you get 3,000 plus all working on the same theme with the same limited assets, eventually there's gonna be some overlap.
Back in the land of Godot, while I was still thinking about the fishing mechanic, reality was finally starting to sink in. We were pretty deep into the first day, and it just dawned on me that we were going to have to cut something out. This is when I realized that we had committed our second major mistake: lack of focus on the theme. You see, it's mainly the auxiliary steps in the game loop that meet the scale theme. If I had to cut the scope, and believe me, I inevitably did, I'd be left with the weakest link, the actual fishing. Sure, fish have scales, but that's unacceptably vague in my opinion. I considered 2 options: keep going down this route and see what happens, or pivot to an entirely different project where the core game loop fits nicely with the theme. Guess which option I took. As it turns out, we've learned nothing from last year's Kenney Jam, where we also didn't settle on a final plan until way after the halfway point. But we pulled through then, so hopefully we can pull through now. We scrapped the fishing idea, so what do we do now? I decided to revert back to weighing scales as the theme target. Browsing through the asset packs, a culinary theme felt the most viable, as K-Kit's restaurant bits looked like it would have everything we needed. Work surfaces, cutlery, ingredients to chop and measure, everything except...
As it turned out, the one model we needed the most, namely the weighing scale, wasn't available. But fortunately, the rules do permit us to combine assets. Kenney's prototype kit contains several geometrical primitives that easily allow us to compose custom objects. On top of this, I used the bowl from the aforementioned restaurant bits. One of the planned recipes would require a blender, which also wasn't available out of the box. The bottom half was straightforward, also assembled using the prototype kit. For the upper half, the cup, blade, and contents of the blender, I had to think outside the box. I used this marker model from the prototype kit since it had jagged edges. For the cup, I used this plastic tray from K-Kit's board game bits, then just applied some transformations to give it a more fitting shape. Also from board game bits, I used this simple rounded cube to represent the blender liquid.
Once I put together this crude, square-shaped kitchen, I got to work on the mechanics. The current plan was to have a fully mouse-controlled game from the perspective of a chef, where you would cut, measure, and cook ingredients to form various recipes. My first task was to implement dragging via the left mouse button. This lets you manipulate the tools and containers and such. Next, I added some simple interactions, like chopping the carrot with a knife. This required the two objects to collide with a specific amount of force. Tap it too lightly and nothing happens. Give it a good wham and it disintegrates into 5 slices. Ideally, I'd like to cut it 1 slice at a time, but time was already dwindling. Once chopped up, you could then deposit the slices into the bowl, where you'd see the total weight of the ingredients. The aim of the game would have been to target exact measurements, otherwise your meal would have been considered a failure. But unfortunately, this is one of many mechanics that ended up being cut out. To add some depth, I wanted different appliances to reside on different work surfaces, such as a stove, serving tray, blender, and so on. To accomplish this, I made it so you can smoothly rotate from surface to surface using various input methods. Everything you've seen so far may look basic, but it was challenging to implement. Mainly because I haven't done anything 3D in Godot for a while now, so you can call it a skill issue. I had to consider things like making sure the picked up objects stay a consistent distance from the camera, locking the object to an equivalent distance when rotating the camera, preventing collision when rotating, respawning the objects if dropped by accident. Getting things to stick to the bowl was challenging, and it still doesn't work correctly if the bowl is upside down. Lots and lots of little considerations that ate the time away. So much so that it became clear, even with several hours remaining until the deadline, that we'd have to cut the scope from 5 recipes down to 3 at best. That brought us down to stew, smoothies, and a burger. At this point, I shelved the carrot and potato stew scene that was maybe halfway done to work on the smoothie scene, which would have served as a tutorial of sorts. There was no chopping in the smoothie scene, just placing various fruits and such into a bowl and then in the blender we mentioned before. Completing each step of the recipe unlocks a new surface. Each main ingredient is then accompanied by this glass of milk from K-Kit's holiday bits. Once the blender is full, I played a simple particle effect to make it clear that it's doing something, and after a short duration produces a smoothie, which is just a recolor of the milk asset. Once the smoothie was ready, you would unlock the surface with the serving tray, and this caveman model was used to try to indicate that there was a customer here waiting for his order. Delivering it unlocks the final surface with the remaining ingredients. It turned out that the restaurant pack did not contain a lot of fruit, so the remaining ingredients come from Kenney's food kit.
I quickly jumped in to acquire some of the final assets, some of which I just merely extracted from composite models, like the strawberry from this model in K-Kit's resource bits, and an individual carrot slice from this clump of slices. The rest were just recolors of assets we already had. I recolored a glass of milk to match the output of each smoothie recipe. After importing the milk model and exporting it in a different name, I get this color palette. From the same palette, I locate the color I want and swap it with all the whitish colors, which resulted in these different colored liquids. The final visual touch are these recipe callouts, letting the player know what they're making and the amount of ingredients they need. For the boards, I used Kenney's UI pack, RPG expansion. After setting up the layout, I just cropped out the items I wanted from the pack's preview and then tried to make it not look pixelated as all hell. The soundtrack was composed while the game still had a fishing theme, so I ended up with 2 tracks. But even when we switched to a cooking game, the soundtrack still fits the mood. You have a slow and relaxing guitar track for the main menu, this was intended for the fishing scene, and then a faster track for the gameplay loop. This would have been used for the secondary scenes of the fishing game. The logo, Mix It Up, was mostly inspired by cereal box designs, using some bright saturated colors. And I wanted to make it clear in the thumbnail that we're using a digital scale to fit the theme, in case that wasn't clear when you're playing the game. The thumbnail had a quick change, since we originally planned a few different recipes before we switched to only milkshakes. So the contents in the bowl were swapped with what you actually use in game. For the main menu, I had an idea of animating the thumbnail assets I made, and then I realized that's prohibited. So we just ended up taking a screenshot from an old build and used that as a background with our logo on it.
We reduced the final iteration of the game from 5 recipes to 3 to just 1. We always reserve 1 hour to handle the exporting and publishing steps. So we just utilized what little time we had to hook up the sound, playtest, and fix bugs. We submitted the game 33 minutes and 29 seconds before the deadline, and we were one of 615 entries. As mentioned, the jam had a few extra bonus goals you could pursue for an extra challenge. While we didn't explicitly chase after any of these, we did meet a few by accident. Those being mouse only, we do support 2 keyboard shortcuts but they're optional, and cross-dimensional. Most of the game is 3-dimensional, but we created custom sprites for the recipe callouts. The key lesson to be learned from this endeavor is to keep it simple. Rather than coming up with a grandiose plan that we end up inevitably trimming, we need to learn how to start simple and build on top of it. I'm glad we met the deadline, just barely, but I have to ask myself, is it better to ship a project I'm not happy with or no project at all? What do you think? Leave a comment down below. The final shipped product contains assets from the following 12 asset packs listed in alphabetical order. We used 1 or 2 assets from the majority of them, with K-Kit's restaurant bits being the main workhorse, followed by Kenny's food kit as a distant second. Hope you learned something while watching this. Don't be like us, just come up with a simple idea and stick with it. See you in the next one.